Joining us, this is The World This Week. We're with Christopher Dickey of Newsweek and The Daily Beast, Maakad Symons of the Australian Financial Review, Helena Servettaz of the Russian language service of Radio France International, and Craig Copetas of Quartz and The Atlantic. Now, when he woke up the day after last week's show, Craig already knew we'd be discussing tiny Cyprus, a nation that weighs 0.2% of the Eurozone economy. But did he know 1 week on that banks would still be closed and cash machines empty? The European IMF unprecedented plan to directly tax all bank accounts backfiring miserably. Cyprus's banking sector may be bloated 7 times the size of its actual economy and opaque, but dipping directly into personal bank accounts, Craig, that's never been tried before. Have things panned out as you thought they would?
Yeah, they have. And the recent poll down there, what was it, 93% of the people said they'd rather leave the EU than give them their money. This is significant on a global stage, beyond what's happening within the incompetence of the EU. The fact that the Cypriots went to their cousins in Russia for help instead of the Americans or anyone else shows that there has been a sea change in power in the world. If you look at the big picture on this, you look.
But those ties go way back.
Yeah,
they go way back, but they've never. But Cyprus has always been part of the EU. By the way, Cyprus was the only Western country during Soviet times where a Soviet passport holder could go without a visa. That had always been their playground. But
so what's the change in that?
Well,
case?
the change is the change is that the Russians have not taken off the table the idea that they're going to come in and help bail them out, whether or not it's through the gas fields, which I know they said they haven't done, or a loan, because where's America? 20 years ago, America would have been there to take care of this. 20 years ago, another superpower would have been there.
Yeah, but now it's between Brussels and Moscow. But I mean, most reports suggest the Russians have said we're not doing anything.
And who has the money? And who has the money?
The Russian depositors. Maybe they should do an Iceland.
Well,
There's
also
quite a few.
The Chinese.
Well, the Chinese know they've got Africa, but it's the Russians who have the money.
Yeah, but they're going to pull out. I mean, it looks like they're really backing.
They're not going to pull
let's ask
out.
the
Russians,
expert.
who, by the way, stand to
We have a
lose a
Russian.
lot of money if.
But the first time we heard about Cyprus, it was in November 2011 when everybody wrote in Spiegel when they saw there is 80 milliardaires, Russian milliardaires who got their money. Yeah, billionaires, who got their money there. And so in this exact moment, all European countries should be aware already. So if there is dirty Russian money, you can have problems. It's not only about Magnitsky case somewhere there in Russia. Now you get dirty money here in Europe. So
Berlin is determined to flush them out.
What's
Basically,
dirty?
they're playing
Excuse me. What is dirty about Russian money in Cyprus?
Everything.
I'm
sorry, I couldn't resist.
Well, no, that's a nice pithy response, but there have not been any court cases.
Craig, is it normal that Cyprus, which is an island nation of less than a million, should be the #1 foreign direct investor in Russia?
It has been that way since Soviet times.
How can it be?
It goes back to the cultural ties between the Greeks, Orthodoxia, and Russia. And Cyprus, during the Soviet years, I mean, know your history here, okay? During the Soviet years, there were only 2 places a Soviet could go if they wanted sun and fun. One was to Cuba, and it was hard to get in there unless you were a member of the nomenclator. And the other place was Cyprus. And any Soviet who had made a little bit of what they called viziatka or blot on the side, hard currency, valuta, would put that money in Cyprus. Now,
But now we find the
now
it's
different.
Yeah,
And
it's a really different world.
So much.
It's
It's
a
20
different
billion
world.
euros.
Well,
perhaps.
listen, I'm just taking the other side of the argument here. I have not seen any court decisions that say a certain individual has dirty money in Cyprus.
Okay, but even if the money's not dirty, you can't be in a situation where Russian deposits in Cyprus are worth many times the GDP of a country. So this is coming back to the question of the banking sector in Cyprus. And Angela Merkel has a good point here.
And the idea was to tax those. And so what are the Cypriots now proposing to do? They're proposing basically to seize the pensions of the Cypriots in order to
Which
pay
Merkel
this.
has
Certainly that's what the Germans say. They insist that it's the Cypriots themselves who didn't want a ring fence originally around savings accounts smaller than 100,000 euros. They say it was the Cypriots themselves who wanted everyone to pay.
Actually, Cyprus has a big problem in that the banks are their only business, and that is why they're fighting so hard to save their banks. But the way they are dealing with it at the moment has no future. The Cypriot government have to tell the truth to the people. The fees of 6 or 9% are comparatively low compared to what they would have to face if the banks crash.
All right, so pointing finger at Cyprus, whether or not it's right or wrong, nonetheless, the likes of Germany, Finland, lots of the EU countries still insisting that Cyprus pay part of this 17 billion euro plan.
5.8 billion is what they're supposed to be.
17 in total, but they have to come up with 6 billion by Monday.
It's again, for when you look at at how much restructuring has to be done for some of the other countries inside the Eurozone, this is what they call chump change. So why are they insisting on this?
Well, I think because they're very suspicious of what Cyprus has been doing, and I think that they're very suspicious of the ruling class in Cyprus, whether it really is answering to the needs of the Cypriot people and their economy, or whether it's answering to the needs of its big depositors from Russia, which is precisely why the first place the Cypriots go is to Russia and they say to the Russians, it's chump change. You got the money. Yeah. And the Russians say, no, sorry.
Yeah, if Cyprus was so bad, 6 years ago, the IMF was giving Cyprus just wonderful report cards. You could look it up. And then overnight, this happens. I am convinced that the Troika looks at Cyprus as a test tube, as a lab, to see how much they can get.
I think that's ascribing way too much forethought to their crazy decision of a week ago, announced after an all-nighter without consultation of the Russians. Are furious they weren't consulted. Fair enough, but really, and now they're saying exactly the opposite of what they said last Saturday, which is that there should not be a tax imposed on depositors with less than 100,000 euros.
It's not a tax. No. Let's get this. No. Let's make this clear. This is not a tax. What's going on here is not a tax. It's called theft.
All right. The British began the week by pledging to make up the difference if their residents, including 3,500 soldiers who have bank accounts in Cyprus, get taxed, I guess is the word that some of us use at the source. The Economist, that wasn't The Economist, The Economist cover story this week, just when you thought it was safe, and on the cover you see sharks. The sharks were the ones that basically circling are the ones that went away when the European Central Bank last year pledged to buy Greek, Spanish, and Italian debt. Now, though, in its Charlemagne column, saying that voters in Italy and MPs in Cyprus have openly rejected the strictures of the Eurozone. Might the ECB's magic spell be broken? One of the boomerang effects of this, Maakad Symons, could be that Mario Draghi, who's had a lot of good press since he came into office, suddenly now he's in for a rougher ride.
Sure, he's really going to have to start taking responsibility for this crisis, which the European Central Bank is absolutely, completely implicated in. I think it's really... The problem is now that Cyprus could be forced to exit the euro within a matter of days next week. We just don't know what's going to happen. And really the knock-on effects of that cannot be predicted, but they're not going to be good. And markets this week have been fairly shaky. So if he wants his reputation back and to get the Eurozone back on the kind of track it was on a few months ago before the disaster of the election uncertainty in Italy, and now Cyprus becoming the new Greece, the problem is it's a bit difficult to go back on what's occurred in the last week. Everyone is covering their behinds and saying it wasn't me. Although I noticed the Dutch finance minister did admit that he took responsibility for that decision to tax people with less
We've
than
heard certain members of the
100,000.
German delegation also express some contrition over what happened last week. And another precinct heard from on all of this is Moscow, of course. Moscow, which was let out, was not invited to those bailout talks, the original ones.
The scheme regarding Cyprus that's being discussed now looks absolutely absurd. And I think there's a reason for everybody to give it a rethink.
Absurd. So there you have it, says Medvedev. By the way, by midweek, the Cypriot finance minister was in Moscow.
Yeah, but when we speak about Medvedev, the only thing I wanted to remember that he proposed to have their own Russian offshore on far east. So I just want to imagine how many foreign investor will go to Russia and to use this.
So sort of a Russian equivalent of the Channel Islands, a kind of an offshore place that they would have in the far east.
That's right. They won't go back. Most of that money, I mean, let's get the history here straight. The billions of Russian hard currency the Russians had there originally was principally during the end of Gorbachev, during the Yeltsin years. And that money was put there and then loaned back to Russia to develop Russia because the young oligarchs at that time were worried that that money would be seized if it was in Russia. So this whole thing had a life of its own. Now, is the Russian money down there what everyone likes to call dirty money? Well, if you want to talk about what happened in Russia after the fall of communism, that bit of free market capitalism, Wild West capitalism as dirty money, well, yeah, but that's what happened in Russia.
But how many presidents you have seen this week who told we have our state money there, we are very concerned? I've seen only two persons, Putin and Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev.
Right.
For me, it's difficult to imagine that all Ireland will take so much care about state money there that I cannot imagine the same kind of reaction.
I have a final question for you, Helena, before we move on. When you see the way the Cyprus story has been explained in the Western media all week long, do you feel there's a bit of Russia bashing going on? We can draw up the cartoon from the International Herald Tribune's Patrick Chapat on this, perhaps. Do you feel as though there's been some Russia bashing, playing up to stereotypes of what is Russia, and that it's all they're just a bunch of money launderers?
For me, it's really true to life, all these stories.
They're known in Russian as Maduri, ghoulish bandits. That's what they call these people.
But why do Medvedev and Putin? Why did they want that money back in Russia where they can tax it properly? This is the great unexplained.
Yes.
And yet it's we know, but
that's the cost of doing business.
There's something very blatant about saying that we need to protect money in an offshore tax haven where money launderers like to go. I mean, who can benefit from that in Russia beyond the oligarchs who are there?
Well, look, the biggest.
Craig, actually, I think he's benefiting.
I'm all of my Russian
if you
money.
Want to call it dirty money,
okay. He's got a big
my
deposit
rubles
there.
are gone. The most dangerous thing you can do when looking at Russia, and it's very difficult to avoid doing, is to look at it through a Western lens, through Western logic. The fact was, when the oligarchs were established, there were two sorts. There were those who supported Putin, and there were those who didn't, like Khodorkovsky.
It's the only one because
there were some others.
Otherwise, we would have much more people in prison.
There were some others who were eliminated. And in part of the deal in Russia for fealty to the state was that you could do what you wanted to do with your money. That was the deal. It might not be pretty. It might not fit the IMF norms, but guess what? The IMF ain't selling gas to Russia. It's the other way around.
And let's stick with the issue of Russian logic with an unusual court case. One where the defendant's box, or in this case a cage, because that's what they have in Russia, is empty. It's not a trial in absentia. The defendant, Your Honor, is dead. Whistleblowing attorney Sergei Magnitsky died in police custody in 2009. The 37-year-old accused by the state of tax evasion. It has soured relations with the United States, this story, because U.S. Congress put into place a law with sanctions on those who were involved in all of this. Why is Moscow pushing ahead with this trial?
It's very simple. You got already Magnitsky Act in the United States, and now Europeans started to discuss the possibility to have their own Magnitsky Act here in Europe when all those guys got their villas and their children here in schools and university. And, you know, it just, you need to attack. And you thought it's unusual process. But now when we see, it's not surprising at all that they will find him guilty. Even they maybe will probably prove that he killed Kennedy, and you know all these kind of things. It's really usual reaction. Yeah, you see.
But it's an amazing story. So this is going to play on every week, but do Russians? I mean, how do they feel about the way that the story is being talked about in the West?
How do the official Russian?
In Moscow.
Yeah, but also if you watch the official TV, for example, maybe 2 weeks ago, we had a movie which was called List of Browder. So, and we saw Browder like agent for MI6. He was responsible.
He's the chairman of Hermitage Capital, who Magnitsky was working for. Magnitsky came from a law firm. He was an actuary at a law firm in Moscow, and Bill Browder at Hermitage Capital hired him to look into irregularities. Browder was sent off into exile. Magnitsky was put in jail and was somehow
to death.
And it goes on, and this is the Russian normal.
The money in Cyprus is not dirty, right?
Not dirty.
Yeah, you see.
Not dirty.
Just the trials of dead men.
I'm glad we've sorted that out.
Yeah.
Cleared the record there. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Christopher Dickey, Helena Servettaz, Maakad Symons, and Craig Copetas. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.